Today we're looking at Intel's Clear Linux, yet another common request for the show. I've been reluctant to do much with Clear because it's a very developer-y focused distro aimed at Intel hardware, which I don't have, and for a long time it didn't have an installer, or at least a very good one. And as we're about to see, that has changed, and Clear Linux does have its very own homegrown installer baked inside of this live session. I like the colors and the overall style of it. It reminds me a bit of Anaconda, which is the installer used by Fedora and friends. The way that you select package groups, or bundles as Clear calls them, is very similar to how CentOS does it too. I chose the desktop bundle as well as the LTS kernel because we're going to be looking at Clear Linux as a workstation distro, even though it's meant for a variety of other technical and development-centric use cases. So Clear's idea of a desktop is the GNOME desktop, complete with the GNOME login screen and everything. I mean, you're basically looking at a vanilla Fedora desktop here. We'll bust open a terminal and see that the Clear Linux team added some cool terminal colors, as well as gave my system a rather strange host name. The install size is 6.5 gigabytes and the current memory usage after login is 750 megabytes. In HTOP, we can see 96 tasks and 222 threads. Having 96 tasks at idle is reasonable, but 222 threads? Damn. So back to the desktop. Again, this is very similar to Fedora's desktop with just a few little changes. We're running GNOME 3.36.2 here with Clear Linux build 33200. One of the biggest differences between Clear and Fedora is possibly in the background selection. Were you expecting such a huge assortment of backgrounds? Because I sure as hell wasn't. The default background is actually kind of lame, so I'm going to switch it up here. GNOME Tweaks is pre-installed, and we can see what the Clear Linux team did to customize the desktop, which, to be honest, isn't much. Animations are disabled by default, which helps to make Clear Linux feel nice and snappy. This is the standard GNOME theme, but they switched out the default GNOME font with Clear Sans, a good choice not only because the name fits, but because the font actually looks real nice. I feel like pre-installing GNOME Tweaks is a bit like leaving the hood popped so the driver can sneak a peek to see what's going on under the hood. I like that. The icons are nice, but I don't use GNOME, so I don't know if this is the default or not. As far as the default applications go, I was sufficiently whelmed by the variety. But for being a desktop for such a developer-centric distro, I was expecting at least one IDE of some kind installed. I don't know, there's probably another package bundle or whatever for editors or dev tools or something like that. In NeoFetch, we see the Clear Linux logo, which is basically a giant penguin, along with the OS name, which I noticed doesn't include the build number. The LTS kernel is version 5.4.42-40 from 2019, apparently. We've got Bash 5.0 and GNOME all the way down. By the way, does the Clear Linux Penguin have a name? Because if it doesn't, it really should. Or maybe you guys could give it a cool name in the comments. So now let's talk about the encrypted internal drive for a minute here. You guys are going to like this one, or hate it, I don't know. See, decrypting and mounting the drive seems to hose up the whole system, like it is kaput here. Try to launch GNOME disks from the terminal and boom, core dump. Not really sure why, but Clear Linux does not like my internal drive. The external SSD and the USB card reader mounted just fine. The archive tests were good. All of the archives opened with the archive manager, no problems there. Unfortunately, media codecs are not part of Clear Linux's MO, and most of the audio files didn't work, and only the WebM file worked for the video tests. The app images, on the other hand, all worked great, and the FlatRef file opened with GNOME software. Following in Fedora's footsteps, Clear Linux supports Flatpaks and FlatHubs straight out of the box with GNOME software. I got my hands on Steam and OBS, but unfortunately we will not be using them because NVIDIA drivers are a major bear to install on Clear Linux, and I mean, this is Intel's Clear Linux after all, so I guess it's not that surprising. Next up, we've got the network segment, which did not fare well at all. The GNOME sharing stuff wasn't installed or configured, so that means no DLNA file sharing. Samba sharing and even SSH direct connections didn't work here either. Maybe networking is another package that I missed or something. And even though the HP stuff seemed to be pre-installed, my printer wasn't discovered on the network, so we won't be installing that. Bluetooth, on the other hand, worked just fine and it connected the first try, so that's nice. So when I first started filming, it wasn't clear to me that Clear didn't support NVIDIA all that well, so I installed the LTS kernel thinking it would be better for compatibility. Since we're not going to be seeing any Geekbench GPU tests, I thought that it would be cool to add the non-LTS kernel, or the native kernel as they call it, into the mix. For the gaming tests, all I got here is Xonotic, which pulled 98 frames a second with the LTS kernel and 107 frames a second with the regular native kernel. That's a pretty good increase, to be honest. But for the Geekbench CPU tests, prepare to be unimpressed. Keep in mind that the Geekbench tests are entirely synthetic, and the Clear Linux kernel is optimized for Intel stuff. All I'm running here is AMD, so I'm not that surprised by the lack of improvement between the kernel versions. Now let's be clear here, this is not a review of Clear Linux. Hell, it's hardly even an overview because it can do so many different things and we're only looking at the desktop use case, which isn't even what it's designed for. I know a lot of people are going to ask me, well, did it start up and shut down fast? Or how about them Linux kernel optimizations or whatever? And I mean, yeah, I guess it's fast, but what does that mean anymore? I think instead of saying, yeah, it's fast, it would be more apt to say, yeah, it's not slow. Clear Linux is designed with Intel's various architectures in mind, and given that I'm running AMD and NVIDIA gear here, I'm not exactly the target user, right? If you were expecting me to be blown away by the performance of Clear Linux, well, I'm not. It feels like pretty much any other Linux distro that we've seen here on the show with some special sauce, and it's definitely enough sauce to make it feel unique. Clear Linux is a cool Linux distro for its target use case, developers. But for everyone else, it's just I hope that you enjoyed this episode of Distro Delves, and if you did, be sure to thumb up the video and become a patron of mine so you can enjoy all the cool posts I write about cool stuff. I appreciate all your support, and thanks for watching.